My best friend showed up to my wedding in a white dress. Then, in front of everyone, she grabbed the mic and told my husband she loved him. I thought my wedding was over, but what my husband said next, nobody saw it coming, including her. I noticed the dress before I noticed her face. White, not ivory, not champagne, not blush white. The same shade as my own gown, the one I'd spent 11 months choosing, the one my mother cried over in the fitting room. I stood at the back of the church, my hand looped through my father's arm, and watched my maid of honor walk down the side aisle in a dress that could have been mine. Her name was Reagan. She'd been my best friend since we were 7 years old, since the day she punched a boy for pulling my hair and got sent to the principal's office with a grin on her face. She'd been there for every heartbreak, every bad haircut, every 2 a.m. phone call. When Daniel proposed to me on the pier in October, she was the first person I called. She cried harder than I did, so when I saw her in white, my first thought wasn't betrayal. It was confusion. Maybe she didn't realize. Maybe it's off-white. Maybe I'm imagining this. I was not imagining this. The ceremony went forward, vows, rings, the pastor's steady voice, and I told myself I'd deal with it later, at the reception. Privately, the way you're supposed to handle awkward things between friends. I would laugh about it in 10 years. Remember when Reagan wore white to my wedding? What was she thinking? I had no idea how wrong I was about the ending of that story. Looking back now, I think some part of me knew, even at the altar, that something was off. Reagan hadn't met my eyes once during the ceremony. She'd stood in her spot, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands, staring somewhere just past my shoulder the entire time at Daniel. I realized now, not at me. I'd mistaken it for emotion. Everyone cries at weddings, I told myself, even the ones standing closest to the bride. I walked back down that aisle as a married woman, veil lifted, husband's hand in mine, utterly unaware that the hardest part of my wedding day hadn't happened yet. It was still waiting for me, 3 hours away, at a reception hall full of string lights and unopened champagne. The reception hall glowed gold under string lights, 200 guests, my husband's hand warm around mine, champagne glasses catching the light like something out of a dream I'd had since I was 12 years old. Everything was exactly as I'd imagined it until the microphone screeched. Reagan stood up before the best man could even reach for his note cards. She'd taken the mic from the DJ table, and for a moment the room assumed this was planned, some surprise toast, some heartfelt tribute from the maid of honor. People smiled. Someone's aunt actually said, "Oh, how sweet." It was not sweet. "I need to say something," Reagan said, her voice cracking through the speakers. "And I know this isn't the time, but I don't think I'll ever have the courage again." My stomach dropped. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. "Daniel," she said, turning toward our table, tears already streaking down her face, "I've been in love with you since the day she introduced us. I've tried to bury it for 3 years. I told myself I was happy for both of you. But I'm not. I can't watch you marry her and pretend my heart isn't breaking in half." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard in my life. 200 people turned to look at me, at my husband, at the woman in white standing in the middle of my wedding, sobbing into a microphone about being in love with the groom. I felt the room tilt. My ears rang. Somewhere behind me, my mother gasped audibly, and my new mother-in-law's fork clattered against her plate. Somewhere near the bar, I registered distantly, absurdly, the sound of at least 3 phones being lifted into the air, screens glowing, already recording. I didn't think anything of it in the moment. I would think about it very differently within the week. I looked at Daniel. I needed to see his face before anyone else's, before Reagan's, before the guests, before my own reflection in the silverware. I needed to know in that half second before he opened his mouth whether I was about to lose everything I'd just promised my life to. Daniel stood up slowly. He didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to face Reagan. And when he spoke, his tone was calm in a way that somehow felt more devastating than shouting would have. "Reagan," he said, "I've known you were going to do this for 2 weeks." The room, if possible, went even more silent. "2 weeks ago," he continued, "you texted me at 1 a.m. saying you needed to talk. You told me you had feelings for me. I told you then, clearly, So there'd be no confusion that I was marrying the love of my life in 14 days, and that whatever you thought you felt didn't change a single thing about that. I told you to get help. I told you to talk to someone. I never imagined you'd stand up at my wedding and try to blow it apart in front of everyone who loves us. Reagan's face went from tear-streaked heartbreak to something closer to panic. I didn't tell my wife, Daniel went on, and his voice finally wavered, not from doubt, but from anger. Because I didn't want to give your confession power over our wedding day. I thought I could protect her from this. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Emma. He looked at me now, and his eyes were wet. I should have told you the second it happened. I was trying to shield you, and instead I let this become an ambush. That's on me, and I will spend as long as it takes making that right. Then he turned back to Reagan. But make no mistake, nothing about what you feel is my responsibility to fix. And nothing about today was an invitation for you to make our wedding your confession booth. I sat there, stunned, feeling two entirely different emotions crash into each other like waves from opposite directions. Betrayal because my husband had known, for 2 full weeks, that my best friend was in love with him and hadn't told me. And something that felt almost like relief, because in the same breath, he had just stood in front of everyone I loved and chosen me, completely, without hesitation. Reagan was still standing there, mic in hand, her face crumbling under the weight of 200 stares. You could have just told her, she said, her voice smaller now. You could have let me have this. Have what, Reagan? Daniel said. A wedding that isn't yours? A husband who isn't yours? I never gave you a single reason to believe there was anything between us. I am so sorry you're hurting, but I will not let you turn my wife's wedding day into the place you process it. For one breath, I actually believed it was over. I believed the worst thing that could happen at my wedding had already happened, and that my husband had just carried both of us through it. I was wrong about that too. I should have felt relief. Daniel had just stood in front of 200 people and chosen me, without flinching, without apology to Reagan. For about 90 seconds, I actually let myself believe the worst was over. Then Reagan's phone went off. It had fallen out of her clutch when my uncle escorted her toward the doors, skidded across the parquet floor, and stopped near the cake table. Screen lit up, buzzing with a notification. My cousin Priya picked it up to hand it back to her, and that's when she saw it. A text preview, sitting right there on the lock screen. From a contact saved simply as D. Priya didn't mean to be cruel. She told me later she thought it was nothing, thought maybe it would clear things up. Thought I deserved to know before I spent one more second believing everything was fixed. She walked over and put the phone in my hand without a word. The message was from 3 months ago. The preview showed just enough to stop my heart. Last night can't happen again. I mean it this time. D. Last night. Not your feelings can't happen again. Not this text you sent me can't happen again. Last night. Past tense. Something that had already occurred. My hands went cold. I looked up, and Daniel was watching me from across the room, his face changing the second he saw what was in my hand. Emma, he said, moving toward me. Let me explain. Explain what, exactly? My voice came out flat, stripped of everything. You told 200 people 2 minutes ago that nothing happened, that you rejected her the second she said something. You made it sound like this started and ended in one phone call 2 weeks ago. It did. The confession did. This is from before that. It's not what it looks like. Then what does it look like, Daniel? I held the phone up so the whole table could see it, though by then half the reception had already gone quiet again, drawn back in by the sound of my voice cracking. Because it looks like there was a last night. It looks like there was a this time, which means there was a last time too. He didn't answer fast enough. That was the worst part, not the words he eventually found, but the 2 full seconds of silence before them. The 2 seconds where I watched my husband, 3 hours into our marriage, search for a version of the truth he could survive telling me. It was the bachelor party, he finally said. 4 months ago. Nothing happened between us before that, I swear to you. Nothing. Reagan had too much to drink. She followed me outside when I went to get air, and she kissed me. I stopped it. I told her it was a mistake, that I was marrying you in 4 months, that it could never happen again. That's the text. That's all it was. You stopped it, I repeated. So it started. For maybe 10 seconds, Emma. 10 seconds I have regretted every day since. And you didn't tell me. I thought if I told you, it would blow up the wedding. I thought I could carry it alone, and it would just disappear. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I have never been more sure of anything in my life than I am of loving you. And I let one drunk, stupid, 10-second mistake sit unspoken for 4 months because I was a coward. I stood there in my wedding dress, in a room full of people who had watched my best friend confess love for my husband, and then watched my husband stand up and seemingly win the moment back, and now I understood that the version of the story he'd given the room wasn't a full accounting. It was a curated one, clean enough to save face, not clean enough to be true. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely arrives once. It arrives in layers, each one peeled back just when you think you've reached the bottom. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember crossing the room. I only remember that at some point I was in front of Reagan, closer to her than I'd been all night, and the only words that came out of my mouth were, "How long have you loved him?" The real answer this time. She looked at the phone still in my hand, and whatever composure she'd been holding on to finally gave out. "Longer than I want to admit," she whispered. "Since your engagement party?" And then after the bachelor party, I let myself believe it wasn't one-sided anymore. "He told you it was a mistake," I said. "He told you it could never happen again. That's not the same as it not being one-sided." "Reagan, that's you deciding to hear what you wanted to hear." "Maybe," she said. And for the first time all night, there was an edge under the tears, something almost defiant. Or maybe you should ask yourself why he kissed me back before he stopped it. I didn't imagine that part. The room seemed to hold its breath along with me. 10 months. She had smiled at me for 10 months, helped me choose flowers for 10 months, zipped up the back of my wedding dress 3 hours earlier with hands that must have been shaking for reasons I never once suspected. And for 4 of those months, she'd been carrying a secret that belonged to both her and my husband, not just to her alone. "And you let me ask you to be my maid of honor." I said, "You said yes." You stood beside me while I picked out this dress, already knowing what happened at his bachelor party. I thought I could get over it. She said, "I told myself the kiss was a fluke, that once you two were married, it would stop mattering, that it would just burn itself out." It didn't. It got worse. Watching you plan a wedding around a man who'd kissed me back 4 months earlier nearly broke me. And today, hearing him say his vows to someone else while I stood right there, holding your flowers, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "So you decided my wedding day was the place to let it out." I said. My voice didn't shake. I was surprised by how steady it was. "You didn't fall in love quietly and struggle with it in private. You matched my dress. You waited for the reception. You took the microphone before the best man could even give his toast. And you left out the one detail that would have actually made people understand you that this wasn't unrequited. Not fully. Not for 10 seconds in a parking lot 4 months ago." She didn't deny it. That was the moment I understood, with total clarity, that the version of Reagan I'd loved since I was 7 years old, the one who punched a boy for pulling my hair, had quietly become someone I didn't fully recognize anymore. Somewhere in the last year, jealousy and a stolen kiss had curdled into something that looked for all the world like love, but had rotted into a need to be seen, even if being seen meant detonating the biggest day of my life to do it. Security, my uncle, actually, who happened to be off-duty police, and built like a linebacker, gently but firmly walked Reagan out of the reception hall. She didn't fight it. She looked back once, at Daniel, then at me, and I watched something break in her expression. Like she was only now realizing what she'd actually done, and that no amount of tears would undo it. But she wasn't the only one I still had to face. The band didn't know what to do. For a full, agonizing minute, no one spoke, no one moved. 200 guests suspended in second-hand shock. My father stood up, walked to the front of the room, and announced an open bar for the next hour, and a ripple of nervous laughter finally broke the silence. The band picked up a slow song. Conversations resumed at half volume, the way rooms do when everyone is pretending not to be listening. I didn't dance. I walked straight past our table, out the side door of the reception hall, into the cool dark of the parking lot. and I heard Daniel's footsteps behind me before I'd even reached the edge of the light. Emma, please, let me explain the rest of it. There's a rest of it? I turned to face him, still holding Reagan's phone in my fist like evidence I refused to let go of. You had a chance to tell 200 people the truth. Daniel, you stood up there and gave a speech about integrity and honesty and choosing me, and you left out the part where you kissed her back. For 10 seconds, I stopped it. I told her immediately it couldn't happen. And I never touched her again, and I never once considered leaving you for her, not for a single second. Emma, I swear that on everything I have. But you let me marry you today without knowing. I said, you let me stand at that altar believing the version of you I thought I knew completely. And the whole time, there was a piece of this you decided I didn't get to have. I was ashamed, he said, and his voice broke on the word in a way I'd never heard before. Not once in 3 years. I got drunk at my own bachelor party and let something happen that never should have. And I hated myself for it every single day since. I told myself confessing it right before the wedding would only hurt you for no reason. That the mistake was already handled, already over. I was wrong. I see now that I made the choice to protect my own guilt instead of respecting your right to know. That's not the same as protecting you. I understand that now, even if I didn't then. I stood there in the parking lot in my wedding dress, mascara starting to run despite everything I'd done to keep it together. And for the first time all day I let myself cry not the pretty, camera-ready tears of a bride overwhelmed with joy, but the ugly shoulder-shaking kind that comes from realizing the person you just promised your whole life to had been carrying a version of the truth you didn't get a vote on. I need space, I finally said. Not forever. Just tonight. I can't dance with you in front of everyone right now and pretend this is the wedding I planned for 11 months. He nodded, jaw tight, eyes wet. Whatever you need. I spent the next hour in the bridal suite with my mother and my sister. The three of us sitting on the floor in our formal wear like we used to when I was a teenager, and something at school had gone wrong. My mother didn't tell me what to do. She just held my hand and let me talk in circles until the circles started, slowly to straighten out. He didn't lie to keep you, she said eventually. He lied because he was ashamed. Those aren't the same sin, Emma, even if they feel identical tonight. One is a man protecting himself from consequences. The other is a man who married you anyway, knowing exactly what he'd have to eventually admit, because he couldn't imagine a life where you weren't in it. How do you know which one it was? Because a man planning to keep something buried forever doesn't confess in front of 200 people the second it surfaces. He confirms, deflects, minimizes. Daniel didn't do any of that once Reagan's phone hit the floor. He told you the truth, the second you asked for it. Ugly as it was. I sat with that for a long time. I found Daniel an hour later, sitting alone on the back steps of the venue, tie loosened, jacket draped over the railing, staring out at nothing in particular. He stood the moment he saw me, like he'd been waiting the entire time without letting himself hope. Do you want to keep going? He asked quietly. The night, I mean, us. Any of it. I'll understand whatever you decide. But I need you to know I choose you. I've chosen you every single day for 3 years, and I will spend as many days as it takes proving that tonight doesn't undo that. I'm not okay, I said. I want you to understand that clearly. I'm not okay, and I won't be okay tomorrow either. Or maybe for a while after that. I know, but I don't want to leave, I said. I want to stay married to you. I want us to actually talk, not the sanitized version you give 200 wedding guests. The real one, every uncomfortable piece of it starting tonight and continuing for as long as it takes. I promise, he said, and for once, I believed the weight behind the word, not just the sound of it. I thought the hardest part was behind us. I was wrong about that too. 3 days after the wedding, my cousin's boyfriend, someone I'd met exactly twice, posted 11 seconds of shaky phone footage online. Reagan at the microphone, tears streaking down her face. The words, "I've been in love with you since the day she introduced us," ringing out clear as day. He captioned it, "The most unhinged wedding toast I've ever witnessed," and went to bed. By the time he woke up, it had 2 million views. Within a week, it had crossed 20 million. Strangers made reaction videos dissecting Daniel's response frame by frame. arguing in comment sections about whether he was a hero or a liar, whether I was the real victim or, in the uglier corners of the internet, somehow the villain of my own wedding for daring to be upset. Someone found Reagan's social media and posted her workplace. She was placed on leave within days, her employer citing conduct unbecoming, though I suspect it had more to do with the flood of angry messages her company's inbox was receiving than any policy violation. I hated all of it. I hated that 200 guests had somehow become 200 million strangers with opinions about the worst night of my life. I hated that somewhere in a comment section, someone was debating whether my marriage would even last 6 months, as if my wedding were a reality show finale instead of the actual architecture of my actual life. Daniel hated it too, but for a different reason. They don't know about the phone, he said one night, scrolling through headlines with an expression like he was reading his own obituary. They think I told the whole truth up there. If this ever gets out the bachelor party, all of it, it won't just be Reagan they tear apart. Then we tell them ourselves, I said, surprising myself with how calm it came out. Not the internet, not a video. Just us, deciding what we owe each other, regardless of what 2 million strangers think they're owed. We turned off notifications. We didn't respond to a single interview request. And there were more than I ever expected a morning show producer, 2 podcasters, a tabloid offering an amount of money that made my stomach turn. Reagan, we later heard, tried to sell her side of the story to one of them. No one bought it. Something about a woman who wore white to her best friend's wedding and cried into a microphone didn't play as sympathetically as she'd apparently hoped it would. The video is still out there. It will probably always be out there. But somewhere in the middle of that ugly, exhausting month, Daniel and I stopped checking the view count and started actually rebuilding the thing the video only ever showed the surface of. Reagan and I have not spoken since that night. She sent one letter, months later, apologizing not for loving Daniel. She wrote because she said she couldn't control that, but for how she'd chosen to handle it, for the kiss she never told me about, for the white dress, for the microphone, for turning my wedding into her stage instead of coming to me privately, months earlier when there might still have been a version of our friendship worth saving. I read it twice and didn't respond. I heard secondhand that she moved out of state not long after the video finally stopped trending. I hope, genuinely, that she's found some peace somewhere far from all of it. I'm just not the person who gets to help her find it anymore. Daniel and I did talk, really talk, for weeks, not just the one hard night on those back steps. He told me everything this time, all at once, refusing to let any piece of it stay hidden for me to discover later the bachelor party. The 10 seconds he wished he could erase, the 4 months of silence, the 1 a.m. text 2 weeks before the wedding, the conversation where he thought he'd handled it by simply telling Reagan no. I told him how much his silence had cost me, even though I understood, eventually, why he'd chosen it. We fought about it more than once. We cried about it more than that. We even sat down together with a marriage counselor for a few months, not because our marriage was failing, but because we both agreed we didn't want to start it having already learned the wrong lesson about what protecting someone means. Slowly, we came to understand each other better because of it, not despite it. That day, and the ugly month that followed it, showed me exactly who my husband was under pressure, steady, and eventually fully honest, unwilling to let anyone else rewrite the story of our marriage, including 2 million strangers on the internet. And it showed me who Reagan really was. Underneath 10 years of friendship, someone who, when she couldn't have what she wanted, tried to take mine instead.